To a clown. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining in our Women Physician Scientists Brilliance, Resilience, and Vision sessions that we have begun. And we're very excited today to hear from Dr. Lindsey Criswell, who's currently the director of the National Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal and Skin Diseases, formerly a faculty member here. And she's going to be talking about some of the career issues we've been sort of very passionate about in this group. The title of our talk is called Charting a Successful Career in Academic Medicine Through Creativity and Collaboration. Just to give a brief bio, Lindsey just became director of NIAMS in February 2021, and she previously was vice chancellor of research here at UCSF. And in fact, those of us in the WPSS exec committee, we actually met with Lindsey early on. So this is really fun to have her come and speak with us. She's a professor of rheumatology, professor of orofacial sciences. Her research focuses on genetics and epidemiology of human autoimmune disease, in particular rheumatoid arthritis and systemic lupus erythematosus. She's also mentored many students and junior faculty to independent research careers, which is why she's here. We'd love to hear from her. She also earned a bachelor's degree in genetics and a master's degree in public health from UC Berkeley. She also has a doctorate in science and genetic epidemiology from the Netherlands Institute of Health Sciences, and her MD is from UCSF. She's board certified in internal medicine and rheumatology and a member of the American Association of Physicians. Thank you so much, Lindsey, for speaking with us, and feel free to share your screen and take it away.
Okay, let me just change my view here for just a second. Okay, so can you all see my screen?
Yes, looks great.
Great. So it is such a pleasure to be speaking with past or previous colleagues at UCSF, and I'm sorry I'm not there with you. That would have been a whole lot of fun. So, but thank you, Sulggi, for the invitation, and to the UCSF Women's Physician Scientist Supergroup for the invitation to speak. It's a real honor to be sharing this time with you this afternoon. So I'm going to cover three broad areas. The first, something about my background and training and the early stages of my career as an academic researcher. And then I want to share some of my experiences as an administrator and a leader, which really has helped to prepare me for my current role at the NIH. And then I want to share with you some NIH opportunities and resources just to make sure they're on your radar screens as you're navigating your own careers. So I'm a native Californian. In fact, I'm still finding it hard to believe that I live on the East Coast now, but I grew up in Southern California. I spent virtually all of my training in public institutions. I had a long-standing interest in science and had some great research opportunities as an undergraduate at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory and also at the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. So really struggled to figure out whether I'd pursue a medical degree or a PhD degree, and decided to take advantage of the opportunity to go to UCSF for medical school, thinking that it would keep my options open. So I had the opportunity after my undergraduate work at Berkeley to move across the Bay and had a wonderful experience, although stressful for sure, as a medical student at UCSF. I ended up doing my internship and residency at a new program in Southern California, Scripps Clinic Green Hospital, and it was a striking contrast to my experiences at UCSF, which I'm grateful for. And importantly, that program had a fantastic network of referrals for complex rheumatologic disease. And early on in my training, I was exposed to patients with scleroderma and dermatomyositis and relapsing polychondritis, and I was completely hooked on rheumatology. So developed a focus at that time. And in those early days, the notion of evidence-based medicine was brand new, and I was very attracted to that concept based on some of my experiences in the clinic. So I decided to pursue additional training in epidemiology and biostatistics. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to return to the Bay Area, where I could pursue rheumatology training at UCSF because I knew they had a stellar program. In fact, I still remember so well some of the rheumatology attendings that spoke to our medical school class. They were really impressive. And it also provided me with an opportunity to combine that training with additional training at UC Berkeley, which proved to be really valuable, especially in the early stages of my career. So I want to mention two amazing opportunities I had to pursue additional training in Europe. And I would encourage all of you to look for those opportunities along the way. It can be very difficult to rearrange your life and move to another area, but it is such an enriching experience and a humbling experience. The first opportunity I had was as a result of a mid-career award called a K-24 that I received that was primarily for mentoring, one of the few awards that actually provide substantial support for mentoring activities. So I want to make sure that's on your radar screen. But it also allowed one to spend up to a year abroad. So I knew that I wanted to develop additional skills in the area of genetic epidemiology, which I had decided was the perfect field for me, given my interests. And so I pursued training at the Netherlands Institute for Health Sciences, and just the experience of working in a very different environment and getting additional training, it was really so grateful for that. And then I took another opportunity to return to Europe, this time in France. And my goals at that point were to work closely with a leader in the area of Sjogren's disease, which was an effort that I had become interested in as a result of some unique resources, which I'll describe in a bit. So both of those experiences were really rewarding experiences, and I hope that many of you can take advantage of or create similar sorts of opportunities for yourselves. So I want to say something about mentoring, both being mentored and being a mentor. I've been very fortunate to work with incredible people as mentors. Shown in this slide on the left is Wally Epstein, who was my mentor during my fellowship in my early faculty stage. And he was an amazing person. He was admired for the breadth of his experience as a clinician, as a researcher, which spanned basic laboratory research related to rheumatoid factor and all the way to health services research, which is something that he pursued as a senior faculty member. He also had major interests outside of medicine and really stressed the importance of his relationships with his family and those outside interests. So he was a great role model for me. He also was very forward-thinking and outspoken in terms of his support for women and people of color in medicine. So I admired him for being so vocal at a time when people weren't talking about that so much. Now, also pictured in this slide, in addition to Wally's wife, Sherry on the right, Eve Engelman, some of you may have heard of him, an amazing person. Was considered the first academic rheumatologist in California. He recruited Wally from Columbia to UCSF. He, in addition to being an outstanding clinician and researcher, he was also a prodigy violinist and continued playing beyond the age of 100. And in fact, he was even seeing patients beyond the age of 100, believe it or not. So pretty amazing group of mentors that I had the privilege to work with. I wanted to share this photo of Wally with my daughters from many years ago. Wally, in addition to being an accomplished cello player, something he picked up as a very senior person and worked hard at, he also took a sabbatical year to learn woodworking, something that no one else was doing at the time. And this is a picture from a day that I spent with Wally at his home. He was working on a woodworking project with my daughter. So just tells you a little bit about the sort of person he was. And once again, a really important role model for me. So of course, funding, and in particular funding through the NIH, was critically important and continues to be for anybody who wants to pursue research. And I wanted to talk about some of the different funding opportunities I had the good fortune to receive that for different career stages and that provided different types of opportunities. First of all, through my work with Wally, I had the great opportunity to join a multidisciplinary arthritis and musculoskeletal diseases center group. So this is a center that was supported by a center grant from the NIH, and it brought in a diverse group of researchers and trainees, health economists, nurse trainees, even an urban planner, folks with a variety of backgrounds and training. And because of their work together and the funding through the center grant, they also developed rich research resources that I could leverage even as a fellow, which really allowed one to get up to speed pursuing research right off the bat. Very important. Now, this center grant also had development and feasibility funding opportunities available internally. And that was actually the first grant I was able to pursue, to receive, not the first that I applied for, mind you. Persistence is really important here, but it allowed me to stay on at UCSF beyond my fellowship training. So I also managed eventually, and I want to emphasize this word eventually, because I don't think there's any opportunity that I was successful at on the first try. So I just want to emphasize kind of how important persistence is along the way, and was for me. But I also eventually was able to secure an R01 grant, which provided me a wonderful opportunity to start focusing on the genetics of lupus, which had become a really great interest of mine. I've already mentioned the K24 award. I want to emphasize it again because it's one of the few funding opportunities that actually provide support for mentoring activities, in addition to the opportunity for training experiences abroad. I mentioned that center grant that I participated in as a fellow. UCSF had an opportunity to receive funding through another center grant some years later. This allowed me to focus on genetics and ancestry studies in the context of a multidisciplinary research group, and was also able to receive funding for another center that allowed us to develop a precision medicine center at UCSF. So these different sorts of funding opportunities allow one to grow from a trainee to a junior investigator to a leader of a center grant, and are really critical opportunities for the kind of succeeding along your career path. But before I leave this slide, I also want to mention the critical importance of other funding sources. For example, before I got my first R01 grant, I was able to secure funding from a Pfizer Scholar Award program. I don't think I would have been able to stay on at UCSF as a faculty member had I not secured that support. Not only does it provide the resources, but it convinces your institution that maybe you're worth supporting. So want to encourage you all to be looking for other funding sources outside the UCSF as well, outside the NIH as well. So another pivotal experience that I had the great fortune to be involved in as a junior faculty and member, this was an effort called the North American Rheumatoid Arthritis Consortium. It was the first major effort to try to tackle the genetics of rheumatoid arthritis, and one of the very first efforts to take advantage of what became known as genome-wide association screening to identify genes for complex disease. The reason why I'm mentioning it is not only was it just a fabulous experience for me to work with leading geneticists, senior rheumatologists, to acquire great practical experience, but it's the sort of thing that mentors or senior investigators might normally discourage an early stage investigator from pursuing. Why join this effort? You're going to be just a little pipsqueak, you know, and with everybody else leading it. But it was really provided me with an amazing opportunity to learn and to take on some projects that I wouldn't have otherwise, in addition to contributing to an important research resource that supported many studies over up to a decade. So let me shift gears now, and I want to talk about my experience as a mentor. I had the opportunity to mentor lots of different people from different backgrounds with different career aspirations, from high schoolers to college graduates, to fellows, to graduate students. Really enjoyed those experiences. By no means was everybody that I was working with interested in pursuing an academic career, but I hope that I helped each one of them in a different way, and I certainly found the relationships gratifying. I continue to work with some of these people today. I know many of them, and we keep in touch, and it's really so fun to watch how their careers have evolved. And I've learned so much from them, and I continue to learn from the people that I have the opportunity to work with, who are early in their career and have different backgrounds and different skill sets than I do. So really would encourage you to, you know, be willing to devote some time to mentoring, even though it's not always adequately supported. In addition to being important service, it's a really gratifying experience. And of course, in addition to just kind of helping these folks understand where their passions are and what sorts of careers they want to pursue. Mentors are also important for providing access to research resources, as well as advice and opportunities for networking. So I've mentioned already multidisciplinary and collaborative work, and I want to highlight another effort because of the international nature and the interdisciplinary nature, and once again, encourage you to think outside your current circle and to think broadly about the sorts of activities you might want to participate in. I had an opportunity to join at the very early stages an international effort to develop a research resource for Sjogren's syndrome. Because of the nature of this disease, there was very prominent, in fact, leadership from dentists and oral medicine physicians and ophthalmologists, and the funding for this came from the Dental Institute and the National Eye Institute at the NIH, in addition to several nonprofit organizations. So the goal here was to create a research resource. So you might ask, well, is that really how I should be spending my effort? But really to be able to contribute to something that will help so many researchers and to have the opportunity to work with investigators around the world. We traveled to the 9 recruitment sites in 7 countries. We performed site visits. I have a picture here of Aravind Eye Hospital, the largest eye hospital in the world. I had an opportunity to do a site visit there and saw more rheumatic eye disease in a half-a-day session than I had seen in my entire career up to that point. So really want to encourage you to look for these opportunities to not only benefit from these sorts of research resources, but to contribute to their development. So now I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to talk about some of my administrative and leadership opportunities. As I was acquiring experience as an investigator, I wasn't thinking about leadership positions or administrative positions. I was just kind of enjoying my research projects, developing collaborations, and trying to be as productive as I could. But a really important leadership opportunity arose to be the chief for the rheumatology division, following Art Weiss, who had led the division for over 20 years and is just an absolutely stellar scientist. And this was kind of an intimidating and daunting prospect. But, after thinking about it long and hard, I decided that, this was really a great opportunity to help some of the people that had helped me so much and to work with them in a different way. And so I took the opportunity to serve as the division chief. And, it was humbling for sure, working with such smart, talented, accomplished people. But I decided that my goal was to help every single person in the division somehow, in some way, even if it was in a very small way, and really appreciated the opportunity to try to tackle some of the challenges we were facing with this amazing group of people. And it included challenges related to supporting training and career development, and challenges related to developing impactful clinical and research programs, and an even greater challenge of trying to make those efforts sustainable, not just financially, but also from a personal standpoint in terms of bandwidth and quality of life. So really appreciated that opportunity. And on that note, appreciated the fact that I had mentors like Wally and Eve, who taught me the importance of work-life balance and who modeled that and gave me courage to model that as well. So one of the ways in which I tried to model that as the division chief was thinking carefully about social obligations and time demands and balance across all of our domains of our life. But also I expressed my interest in hiking and backpacking by organizing some fundraising trips for the Rheumatology Fellowship Program. And in addition to raising money for our program, it was also a way I could share with others that, it's okay to have other activities. It's okay to have a balanced life. Those are something I tried to encourage. So for the last few years before I ended up leaving UCSF, I had an incredible opportunity to serve as the Vice Chancellor of Research. Once again, I wasn't looking for a more challenging position. I felt plenty challenged, but decided that, at that stage in my career, I really welcomed an opportunity to serve the broader community. Once again, it was a humbling experience, trying to serve as a leader in such an incredible environment. But I now look back and realize that I learned so much from those 3 years. And in fact, I think it's really the experience as Vice Chancellor that allowed me to move into the leadership position at the NIH and to feel somewhat prepared for that new role. But I've listed here on the slide some of the many challenges and efforts that I had the opportunity to work on with my colleagues across the campus. And for those of you that work in these areas, you know well some of these challenges related to clinical trials, their operation and activation. At UCSF, there was the challenge of revitalizing the Parnassus campus, how to organize efforts in human genetics, basic technical things such as how should we be using electronic notebooks? What about tissue biobanking, international research operations? And of course, subsequently, the challenges of trying to conduct research and patient care in the setting of the COVID-19 pandemic and important issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I pursued the opportunity to move to the East Coast. Like I said, something I never thought I would do, and have really appreciated the opportunity to serve in this role. I was sworn in. That was a virtual swearing in, needless to say, with Francis Collins there on my right, the left of your screen, and the now acting director, Larry Tabak, down below. And really first of all, want to share with you all from UCSF, I was so pleasantly surprised to learn what an amazing reputation UCSF has at the NIH, more than I expected. So you should feel very proud for being at UCSF, and you're so highly respected from across the NIH. But also just feel so grateful for having had the leadership experience as I did at UCSF, in addition to my experience as an investigator. I really understand the challenges facing researchers, including those at their early stages and physician scientists in particular. So for those of you that aren't very familiar with the NIH structure, NIAMS is one of only 27 institutes and centers across the NIH. And there is so much overlap in terms of scientific interests and type of scientific tools across these institutes. So I'm sure that for any one of you, if you think about your own interests, you can identify several institutes that overlap with your own interests. So I would encourage you to be broad when you look for funding opportunities and other training opportunities across the NIH, and don't be too narrowly focused on the one that seems most obviously relevant to yours. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the opportunities through the NIH, because there are literally dozens. So I want to highlight a few that I think are particularly important or relevant. And as you'll see in a few slides, I'm going to point you to a resource that has all of these kept up to date for your future reference. But certainly for early stage investigators, K awards, and I've highlighted a few here that are particularly relevant to physician scientists, and I'll mention each of those briefly on the next couple of slides. And then the traditional research project grants, the R01 type of grants, kind of the standard award mechanism for physicians pursuing specific projects, typically driven by specific aims. But I also want to remind you of a couple of awards I've already mentioned, the Center Awards, as well as the mid-career awards that support mentoring. So please keep those in mind as well. So the mentored research awards importantly provide protected time with research support, typically up to 75% effort, also with modest amounts of research expenses. Now, let me note that it's often very helpful to supplement these with intramural funding opportunities or organizations that fund research to provide additional support for the project itself. But listed here are both the K08, a Mentored Clinical Scientist Development Award, and the K23 Award for Patient-Oriented Research. I also want to mention the K99 ROO, or the Kangaroo Award, as it's affectionately referred to. It is extremely competitive because of special features of this award, also because it's the only K award with no citizenship or green card requirement. So that's something to keep in mind for those of you that might be in that situation. But this transitional award supports up to 2 years in the mentored phase, the K99, and up to 3 years in the independent ROO phase. And these are very competitive, but extremely helpful to secure in terms of its ability to well position you to secure a more permanent faculty position. So don't overlook these, and don't be too discouraged by their competitive nature, because some people do get them, and those people might be you. So once again, I wanted to make sure that you know where to reference this information. In this case, all the research training opportunities. I have the website at the top of the slide, but this is a rich resource of all of the different training and career development activities that are available through the NIH, through the different institutes and centers. So I mentioned the R01. Probably most of you have heard about this. Importantly, these may be multi-PI. The budget is not limited, but budgets over $500,000 in any year do require prior approval. The project period is up to 5 years, so very attractive. And importantly, most institutes, including the one that I'm at, NIAMS, have a much more generous pay line for early stage investigators, recognizing that it can be difficult to secure your first R01 grant. So that's very important to keep in mind as you're preparing this application. I also wanted to mention a new R01 award. It's actually named after the previous director of NIAMS, who served in that role for many, many years. He was a passionate supporter of early stage investigators. And so the NIH created this new award. It's an R01 award, but it's an opportunity to secure support for a new change in direction for which no preliminary data are required. In fact, they won't even allow you to include preliminary data in your application. So important for those of you who are early stage investigators to keep in mind. And many institutes across the NIH are supporting these awards. So once again, the Stephen Katz R01 Award. Okay, I don't expect you to remember all of that, but a couple of resources for you to keep in mind. In particular, program officers at institutes that you think are relevant to your interests can be an incredible resource. They are all scientists. They're also administrators, and they have a lot of experience navigating the complex NIH environment. And any sort of question you might have about the science, the technical aspects, and also scientific review officers are great resources for questions about the peer review process. And there also are grant management specialists at all the institutes can provide help with some of the policy and fiscal aspects, because those can be complicated and daunting, especially when you're first getting started. So those are funding opportunities. Let me say a little bit more about research resources. I've tried to emphasize some of the research resources that I have benefited from or that I've contributed to. And I want to make sure that you're thinking about resources that might support your own career development as well. So I've mentioned center grants already. Professional societies often have, in addition to funding opportunities, which I've also mentioned, other training opportunities such as grant writing workshops, which can be extremely helpful. There are many patient registries which can be leveraged for research, often clinical and translational research in particular. And I want to mention a few examples of large data sets that will give you an example of the sort of resources that are available, and also a special opportunity that the NIH Center for Scientific Review offers for early stage investigators to acquire experience and exposure as a peer reviewer. So one of the research resources I want to mention is a partnership involving the NIH, many industry partners, the Foundation for the NIH, and a number of nonprofits. It started in 2014, and it has been incredibly successful. It started with efforts in 3 disease areas: Alzheimer's, rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, and type 2 diabetes, and it's been wildly successful. And so it's been expanding to other diseases and conditions and other activities, such as the recently launched Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium. As I mentioned, these are all public-private partnerships. There's a strong commitment to sharing the data with the broader research community, and also opportunities for individuals not associated with the AMP program to have opportunities to pursue projects in collaboration with the AMP partners. So wanted to mention this because of the breadth. It'll be relevant to many of you. A few other opportunities that I've listed on this slide. These reflect some of my own exposure, but these are just examples of the sort of things you can be looking for in your own research areas. There's a relatively new effort called the Molecular Transducers of Physical Activity Consortium, or MOTOR-PAC, a very ambitious effort to understand all of the molecular transducers that underlie the effects of physical activity in humans. As with all of these efforts I've been describing, the data are being generated and shared more broadly with the investigative community. I've also mentioned here a long-standing effort that was launched in 2004. In fact, some UCSF investigators played an important role in its development. And this is the Patient-Reported Outcomes Measurement Information System, or PROMIS. It's a publicly available system of highly reliable, precise measures of patient-reported health status. And one of their main advantages is the relevance across a variety of diseases and conditions. I've also listed here the Osteoarthritis Initiative. UCSF played a leading role in this effort as well. It's a unique resource with almost 5,000 individuals followed longitudinally with patient-reported data, functional data, biospecimens, knee x-rays, magnetic resonance imaging, an incredible resource for osteoarthritis studies. So how do you stay up to date with NIH funding? I have the website in the corner, up here in the corner, grants.nih.gov. And I would encourage you to peruse this page periodically to look for new funding opportunities beyond the standard, what are called parent announcements, such as the R03s, the R01s, and also for notices of special interests. Regularly, there are special funding opportunities that are focused in particular areas, often reflecting unique or new opportunities, often even reflecting interest on the part of members of Congress or particularly vocal voluntary organizations. So a good idea to be checking this resource periodically. So I mentioned this opportunity through the Center for Scientific Review to serve on a study section. I don't think this program existed when I was an early stage investigator, but when I did have an opportunity to serve on study section, it was quite an eye-opening and educational experience. And I would encourage all of you to consider doing this. As you can see, there's qualifications listed here on this slide. It's really meant for early stage investigators, so you could not have received an R01 yet. And there's some more information at the site on the slide. And I assume my slides will be shared with you all subsequently so that you don't have to be jotting down these websites. But this is a great opportunity to get a truly inside look at the peer review system at the NIH. Very helpful for your own grant writing. So last slide, just a few final points about mapping a successful academic research career path. And I'm focusing here on NIH funding, but once again, I want to make sure I emphasize the fact that many organizations outside the NIH provide important opportunities for training and as well as funding opportunities and research resources that you should be looking for in your specific areas. So as I mentioned, think broadly in terms of institutes and centers for priorities and goals that overlap with yours. Learn the NIH application and review process. Talk to program officers. Talk to the scientific review officers. Identify the program officers at the institutes that overlap with yours. Make early contact with them. Find innovative, well-respected mentors and collaborators. And maybe let me make another note in terms of mentors. I think it's important to recognize that it's unrealistic to think that a single mentor can provide all of the resources and advice and expertise that you might need. So you should be thinking about a team of mentors, a group of people that collectively have the expertise that's relevant to your own interests and your research program, and not to expect to find that in a single person. And your needs are going to evolve over time. So just because you're moving from one mentor to the next doesn't mean that that relationship has failed, but it's natural and expected for you to have evolving needs over time. So I want to make sure you're thinking about mentorship in that very dynamic way. So speaking of mentors, take advantage of your mentors and collaborators' successful grant applications. I know UCSF makes a great effort to share successful applications as well in their library of successful applications. And propose your best and most creative ideas. don't be afraid to present bold ideas. Be courageous, think outside the box, and think about those ideas that you feel most passionate about. And last but not least, persevere. I have a quote here from Albert Einstein that says, "It's not that I'm smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer." And I do want to emphasize that my career path was characterized by many failed attempts at grants and projects that never got underway or completed. But if you persist and if you surround yourself with smart people and good collaborators, I'm confident you'll be successful in the area that you pursue. So on that note, I will stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to take any questions here, or I think there's a separate Q&A session as well. So let me stop sharing so that I can see you all again.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. That was amazing. I mean, you really covered so many topics, and you're like right on time. So yes, we do have we do have a smaller session following, but for right now, if anyone has any questions, it would be great. Please feel free to raise your virtual hand. It's been such a pleasure to hear you talk, not just about your career path, but about mentoring. Yvonne, would you like to start out? Oh, I think you're on mute. Hold on. Let's, oh no, let's see. Okay. Can you guys hear Yvonne? Yeah, let's see. She's not muted, so I think it's a speaker problem.
It looks like she put a comment in the chat function. It might be about the early career.
Yeah, that's right. So Yvonne has definitely she's been on the early career study sections, and she really did have a great experience with that. I never got a chance to do it, and actually those of you who've not received an R01 yet, I think that's excellent advice. Even if you have an opportunity to sit on the RAPS study sections as well, they're very informative to learn sort of how to critique a grant proposal. Joanna?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
And if you could give a brief one-liner intro before your question, that would be great. We can get to know you.
Sure. My name is Joanna Halkias, and I am a newish investigator in the Department of Pediatrics. I study human immune development, and I'm actually very interested in the early career review program, but I read somewhere that there's a requirement for a last author paper. And so I've been in touch with my program officer, and I'm trying to get that last paper out, but between submitting and getting it accepted, and there's going to be obviously a few grant applications in that meantime. And so I was wondering if there was any advice or is that requirement really as strict as is described?
So, hi, Joanna. Thanks for the question. And Renuka is shaking her head no, and I'm also not aware of that requirement. And, if you can't get a definitive answer, you can email me and I'll pass it along to the head of CSR, who I know can provide a definitive answer. But I think it's pretty liberal. But yes, sorry, I can't be definitive about that, but I don't think that's a requirement. So if anybody else is confident, yeah, Renuka, you're sure?
Yeah. Because I did it and I don't have a last author publication. And I also had that impression, Joanna, and I don't know if they changed it, but when I went and checked again, it's like you have to be a senior author, but that senior author, the way they define it on the website is you could be first or last author. And so I qualified because I was like, I have a first author paper. So it's not a requirement, and you can sign up, and usually they're really happy to have somebody do it.
So I'm really glad this came out, because I can make the suggestion that they should, revise the wording so that they're not discouraging people who are fully eligible, So thank you for raising that question.
Joanna, I'll just add that I did this way back a long time ago, like 10 years ago. And I find that like everything with the NIH, relationships matter. And so my mentor talked to the SRO who he was on that study section and was rotating off, and suggested my name and said, I think this person would be really great for it. And then they immediately invited me. So relationships really do matter a lot.
I don't know if you guys can hear my.
Oh, I don't know if Lindsay froze. We froze you. We got Lindsay frozen. If you can hear me, I had a question about the K-24. So let me just make sure she can. So I don't know if anyone here is at the stage where they're applying for a K-24. But one of the things I ran into when I did start asking about it is you're supposed to be associate, but you do have to have a certain number of mentees under your belt. But it is incredibly helpful because I think what's naturally already happening to many of us at the mid-career stage is you're generating a lot of mentees. And so it was really cool to hear Lindsay tell us that you can actually go abroad for part of that. And that's where Lindsay, who just left us and will hopefully come back, who spent her training in the Netherlands during that year abroad. So I'm happy to help collect some questions. We do have probably just 10 minutes left here. So I'll message you real quick, but we can collect some questions in the meantime, or those of you who will be joining the separate Q&A section, which I apologize is a separate Zoom link just for privacy and to allow more frank discussion. But does anyone else have a question that we can sort of bring up and talk with Lindsay when I can get her back on? And let me try to do that on the side. Maybe one thing I'll just also echo that she said, for those of you who haven't yet applied for a K, is to think about applying outside of your institute. There are often many opportunities that, that are much more flexible. And so several folks I know who applied either for a different kind of K than is traditional, like a K01, which is a whole nother thing. And, K and then also outside of institutes. So she had shown that really nice figure with the Venn diagram, which, we'll send around when we share the slides. But I had gotten my K through an institute called National Institute of General Medical Sciences, and it's very broad. So, when you look out for funding opportunities, look for RFAs, and perhaps some of your expertise falls into these different categories. So it's another really creative way.
I think I had a question, Sulggi, just about how NIH operates. And Lindsay mentioned NOCs, and I wasn't sure how NOCs are used, whether there's separate funding allocated to go towards NOC-related questions. Where do you indicate that on an application? How do you find out the database of NOCs and whether your research proposal fits into a NOC? I'm kind of curious about that because I hadn't heard of that until recently. And the other question I had about how NIH works is I know who my program officer is for NIAMS because I reached out to a colleague here who works with that person. But how do you basically figure out who your PO is in general? And probably it's different for different institutes. So if you're doing the strategy of applying to multiple or, being broad in your, how do you figure out which PO you need to connect with? Because I oftentimes will go to the PO with my specific aims page and say, is this suitable?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I'm writing these down because, Lindsay just rejoined us.
So you got.
Oh, we're having some technical difficulties. Okay. I am going to take note of our questions. We can all do this offline and by email. Lindsay is incredibly responsive. And we are going to have the other session. I'm just worried now that her internet connectivity, she's calling from home actually. So hopefully it'll work for the Q&A session. But I'm also going to collect these questions. Some of us within this group actually can answer some of the questions you guys are having. But some of these I think we could all learn from. And so I think in maybe the 3 minutes left, let's just see if Lindsay can log back on. But briefly, everyone should sort of join, besides that funding link that Lindsay had sent out, and Yvonne, you can jump in too, but if you get on the sort of grant email listserv for your institute, that's your primary one probably, so Renika, you're also in rheumatology, right? And so you'd be at NIAMS. In addition to that, every time you see an RFA go out, there is a list of program officers. And so usually I start with one, that's the scientific one, and they'll be like, oh, you're applying for this, and they'll send you to the right person. But it is really critical to have that conversation before you apply. Just like you were saying, like running your aims. So people are kind of shy to do that, but I would certainly, there's a thunderstorm and Lindsay has power. Good Lord. Okay.
It rains there.
I can actually invite her to do by
Answer
phone
Renuka's
call.
question about where to find the NOCs. Like if you go to your institute website, then you can search through all of the NOCs. They're there. And then when you put in your, let's say it's an R01, when you put in your application, you have a cover letter. There's also a separate form where you indicate what the funding announcement is, if it's just the parent R01 or if you're specifically directing it at a specific RFA. But then it will get assigned to a study section that it's most appropriate for anyways, and it gets reviewed with all of the other R01s, that the reviewers are just told this is directed at a particular RFA. But the reviewers honestly don't really assess it any differently than any other RFA, and they score it the same way. And it usually has to meet some specific scoring criteria to get funded either way. The program officers can pull applications to get funded if they like have a borderline score, but you're basically still kind of competing with the rest of the R01s.
Yeah, and I think that, and usually the RFAs, it just means that there's a dedicated amount of funding to be able to to put forth that NOC. And Yvonne is saying there's an NIH assisted reviewer tool that's useful to identify the study section.
You won't believe this. I was saying, I don't know if you guys can hear, but there's an amazing thunderstorm that was starting when I was giving my talk.
Oh gosh.
And right, I was going to say that huge thunder, power went out. It's gone on and off for 3 times. So now I've switched to this MiFi that I just picked up.
I was just going to email you, be like, do you want to call in?
Well, I just got this MiFi, so fingers crossed. But I mean, this is one of the things that it's been exciting moving to the East Coast. Like, oh my gosh, it's super hot outside, but it's pouring rain and there's all this lightning. So anyway.
No, you are amazing. And this is about persistence. I've collected some questions and written them down. And what we will do is we have about 5 minutes before we switch to the dedicated Q&A, but maybe I will have, was it Erin or Renuka that had the question about the NOCs? Oh, that was Renuka. Do you want to just, because I think people would be interested in hearing Lindsay's response to that.
Yeah, hi, Lindsay. I had a question about NOCs. I kind of just learned about them recently, and I was curious to know like how NIH uses them, and like how do you find where your NOCs, where the NOCs are, whether your research fits in with a NOC, like how do you indicate that on your application? And I think I've kind of come across like there are PAs and RFAs and NOCs, like all of these like, NIH related terms. Some of these terms like are associated with dedicated amounts of funding, like a pot of funding. Others are not associated with like a pot of funding. And I wasn't sure whether NOC is associated with like a pot of funding, or how does NIH use that?
Yeah, so it's super confusing. I am still learning about all of that. But my first response is, if you come across a NOC, go to the NIH guide. If you come across a NOC, call the program officer and ask them to fill you in. You're right that often they're not associated with money that's been set aside, but they are a major priority in making funding decisions. And the institutes, I hadn't appreciated how much the institutes vary to the extent to which they use or rely upon the score that comes out of study section. So all the institutes look at the score, but some institutes really have priorities that they've either defined based on NOCs or their strategic plan, and relevance and alignment with those plays a really important role in the funding decision. Typically when there is money set aside for the program, the announcement will say something like, $5 million has been set aside. We intend to, we expect to fund this many awards. But just to be sure, call the program officer. But the point you also made about it's really important that you indicate in your application if you're responding to a specific funding opportunity announcement or a NOSI, because if that isn't flagged, it's possible that won't be picked up. So you might lose the opportunity. Let me say that in the coming year, there are likely to be a lot of NOSIs related broadly to pain. Congress is very interested in pain, and our budget, for example, is supposed to have 24 million extra for pain next year, and many other institutes are getting targeted funding for pain. So you know, and pain is relevant to almost all disease processes, right? So it'll be offer many opportunities for funding. So look out for those. So look out for NOSIs, contact the program officers, find out what the deal is, make sure you reference them heavily in the application, you know, the text and the application, so that you'll benefit from that prioritization.
Excellent. So I'm going to have us switch to the second Zoom link. I hope that's not going to cause too many problems, Lindsay. Please let us know. And thank you for connecting via your Wi-Fi. If you are running into problems, just email me. Thank you so much for this talk. I'm going to go